The Simpsons and Death Note, together at last. After 33 seasons, The Simpsons finally tackled one of the super popular manga and anime series in a Treehouse of Horror segment. And The Simpsons went all out for this parody, even bringing in a subsidiary studio who helped work on the original anime to make the Simpsons version. But in actuality, this isn't the first time the Simpsons franchise wandered its way into the Death Note universe. All the way back in 2008, Simpsons Comics beat the series to the punch, creating a Death Note homage in Treehouse of Horror number 14. Since now we're talking about the world of comic books, that version did a stylistic homage to the original manga series in its full black and white glory. So that makes me wonder, how much do the Simpsons' two versions of Death Note differ from each other? Are they pretty much the exact same, just transported into different mediums? How closely did they stick to the source material? Simpsons Comics or the main TV series? Also, what is this Death Note thing? Geez, they sure seem to like the letter L. This is The Simpsons vs. Death Note. First, let's do a quick general summary of what Death Note is for those unfamiliar. Also, please pardon my terrible pronunciations. As a Simpsons nerd, I am going a little outside my comfort zone and will try my best not to mangle it too badly. Anyway, Death Note is the story of Light Yagami, a high school student and son of a police detective. One day, he discovers a notebook that fell out of the sky called the Death Note. It is filled with very technical rules, but the main gist is he can write a person's name down and they will die. He can specify how it'll happen, and he needs to be able to picture the person's face when he writes their name. The Death Note belongs to a Shinigami, or death god, named Ryuk, and Light is the only person who can see him. Light, who has a very specific sense of justice about him, decides to use the Death Note to rid the world of its criminals and hopefully create a better world. Naturally, this rash of sudden deaths attracts the attention of the police, and Light is hunted down by a mysterious person named L. This leads to many complications, and the series essentially becomes a prolonged chess match between Light and L. There are a bunch of other characters who get involved, and totally brand new story arcs later, but that's all we really need for The Simpsons purposes today. Basically, I would describe the show as a character-driven crime drama with strong supernatural elements. It's also surprisingly bloodless, for those who are squeamish about that kind of thing. It's a heavily dialogue-driven tale. So the tricky thing about The Simpsons taking on Death Note is that you need to find the right character to cast in the Light Yagami role. With him being a student, you're probably looking in Bart or Lisa's direction. Maybe Milhouse, but does anybody really want that? Now Bart definitely has the more trickstery and destructive personality of the two. You give Bart the Death Note, and he's probably not worrying about the ethics of striking back at his tormentors. However, Light's keen intellect and strongly held beliefs line up better with Lisa. Exaggerate Lisa's moralistic bent into a "I must cleanse the world" philosophy, and you're basically there. I think there's a legitimate argument for why Bart or Lisa would be a better protagonist for this parody. Who they pick would lead to dramatically different kinds of stories. Interestingly, Simpsons Comics and the TV series did end up going in totally opposite directions. The comic is a Bart-centric story, and the TV show is all about Lisa. Let's tackle this thing chronologically and start out with Simpsons Comics. At first glance, it's easy to see why this specific comic is so popular. They're going for the full manga homage, changing up their character designs and how they frame the action. Now, this does not totally 100% mimic the format. Most notably, these panels are not meant to be read from right to left, like when reading manga. I'm guessing this is something they discussed, but decided it would be too confusing, especially for the middle story of a book. In terms of the plot, the Simpsons Comics version is a pretty loose adaptation. The world of The Simpsons and Death Note are so dramatically different, so instead they played around with the general premise. For example, we never see Bart find the book falling out of the sky. Instead, he already found it, shows it off, and Jimbo makes the mistake of writing his own name. One of the biggest changes is in how they handle Ryuk and the Shinigami world. This version puts Krusty in the role, which is honestly great casting for Ryuk. Just look at this guy. Amazing. But instead of being some kind of ethereal death god, Krusty is a ghost who accidentally got himself killed. In this version, this book is treated more like a magical object that has always been around. One nice detail is that Krusty's fatal mistake wasn't ripping out a page and writing his name on it. It turns out, even just the paper can kill people. This is a key plot point of Death Note, and ends up getting used in so many shenanigans. As for Bart, they don't try to connect him up with Light's personality, as the two characters are so different philosophically. Bart ends up using the notebook more defensively. He sees Sideshow Bob released from prison, who is threatening to kill him, so Bart kills him preemptively. This is probably the closest thing to Death Note's usual premise of specifically killing criminals from afar. Bob's death on the news is pretty analogous to Light's first killing of a hostage taker. Also, I'm going to assume this death with the steamroller is more a reference to old school Roger Rabbit cartoons rather than that one bizarre show. But who knows. The introduction of the police and the L character is a bit clunky, as Chief Wiggum swoops in and says this mysterious L person knows immediately Sideshow Bob's death was murder. Although maybe this is apt, considering that L successfully makes these leaps of logic all the time in Death Note. However, instead of turning it into a cat and mouse game between Bart and L, they take it in a more chaotic direction. Marge finds the book in the trash and uses it to write a grocery list, inadvertently killing a bunch of food inventors. Homer naturally writes Ned Flanders fanfiction about getting killed by a shark while wearing a dress, as one does. Wiggum keeps putting the screws on Bart, saying L is closing in on the murderer. Interestingly, this results in Bart accidentally killing Dolph, Kearney, Principal Skinner, and Milhouse. Thanks, Marge, very convenient. In the original source material, Light tends to avoid killing his direct classmates and people he knew previously, as to not draw attention to himself personally. At the same time, this does line up with several of the murders Light ends up committing, to prevent people from catching on to him. In Bart's case, he ends up killing all the witnesses by complete accident. Anyway, one of my favorite aspects about the Simpsons comics adaptation is how they handle the mysterious L character. Early on, they explicitly tease that it's Lisa. Since L is Light's nemesis, naturally it's going to be Smarty Pants Lisa for Bart. They even lean into this by stylizing Lisa directly after him. His famous hunched over seated pose, how Lisa sips from that teacup. I love how they write her dialogue here, perfectly capturing the ponderous train of logic that spews from L's mouth. In Death Note, Light very badly wants to find and kill L to prevent him from being caught. His complications are procedural in nature, figuring out how to do it without totally giving himself away. Whereas here, if Lisa is L, the plot would necessitate Bart to kill his own sister, which Bart is clearly hesitant to do. Simpsons Comics ends up subverting this aspect of the story, where it turns out that Lisa wasn't L after all. It was actually Ralph the whole time. You see, Ralph has hunches and likes to solve crimes. It's a fun twist in how it weaponizes the reader's knowledge of Death Note against them. It also features a pretty slick joke about Ralph calling himself L instead of R, referencing the linguistic issues of going from Japanese to English. In the end, it turns out that Lisa found another notebook that allows them to bring people back to life again, and everything turns out okay. This is another key element invented entirely for the Simpsons comic version. There are some sneaky little references to specific Death Note plot points hidden throughout the comic for longtime fans to enjoy. Most notably in this grocery scene. Marge buys Mellow brand gelatin, referencing the Death Note character of the same name. Right next to them are Eat It potato chips, referencing the wonderfully hammy and iconic sequence of Light using chips to hide his secret plan. Also, this is totally Misa, right? Really looks like her. I wouldn't say the comic is catered for hardcore Death Note fans to be wowed by densely layered references or plot shoutouts. This was clearly made to be approachable for all audiences. If you go into it expecting the exact story of Death Note, you're gonna be disappointed. This is more of a highly stylized homage that plays with the format. You should read this thing to be blown away by the adaptation into this totally different art style. I mean, just look at all these character designs. Look at Wiggum, look at Agnes and Skinner, Sideshow Bob, even the blue-haired lawyer. When is this guy ever visually interesting? Writer Ian Boothby and artist Nina Matsumoto ended up winning an Eisner Award for this comic. It was so well received. Even after watching this video segment, I recommend tracking down Treehouse of Horror comic number 14. It is still a good read even today. That being said, after getting the Bart experience, I am curious to see how much the adaptation changes as a Lisa story. Now let's take a look at the TV version, from Treehouse of Horror 33. Right out the gate, it appears the TV series is adhering a bit more closely to the original Death Note opening structure, right down to Lisa's yellow blazer. Yeah, she is definitely the light Yagami of this story. They skip over the Shinigami world opening, but the setup is overall very similar. First showing off the setting of the protagonist, with a voiceover describing how terrible the world is, and then both characters finding this mysterious book falling out of the sky. Death Note sets this at school, whereas the Simpsons start out in the street. It's a great way to show off all the little sign jokes and these new character designs in the background. Look, it's Barney's Bolorama. I can't believe it's a law firm. Wait, is that anime Disco Stew? Right here we get the first change up in the rules, in that in the Simpsons world, Lisa cannot kill the same way twice. I'm guessing the gods wanted some variety after all of Light's heart attack killings. Sticking to the original source material, Lisa goes home and tests out the book on a hostage situation. In this case, Snake stealing a beloved cat in a Mr. Sparkle box. They end up condensing things just a little due to time limitations, getting rid of the second test, and jumping straight to Lisa meeting the Shinigami in her bedroom. I love the attention to detail of the staging of this sequence. Lisa and Light's rooms are laid out similarly, with their computers and bookshelves, with the Shinigami character towering across the room from them. Notably, unlike the comic, which cast Krusty in the role and turned him into a ghost, the TV version goes full Shinigami. Steve Johnson, the most exotic of Shinigami names. The biggest split happens right after this, as we switch to this domestic scene with Homer the salaryman intoxicated after work hosting Mr. Burns. Some cute little Japanese workplace humor thrown in here. The Simpsons have to deal with the fact that Lisa doesn't necessarily have the same motivations for justice as Light Yagami. She is more environmentally conscious, and the beginning is framed in that way. So they adjust it so that Lisa uses the book to stop global warming, killing Mr. Burns in his sleep in the most peaceful way possible. And then Steve helpfully shows her the whole board of executives she needs to wipe out. Also the second page of executives. Dang it, Steve. The Simpsons do this amazingly stylish sequence of Lisa dramatically writing down her names and killing her enemies, shot for shot, absolutely nailing the homage. I mean, just look at this stuff. The split screen, the dramatic flourishes of her hand, the operatic music, just perfect. They even get the red color scheme in this thing with the Shinigami eyes stuff. I love how with the Simpsons version, with their no duplicate death rule, gets to laugh about how exhausted Lisa is by all these rules technicalities. Yeah, Lisa, I've been there. I was exhausted by the technicalities of the Death Note just watching the show. By the way, you see the names of these board members? This is an obscure reference to the Super Famicom game Fighting Baseball. This list of American-sounding baseball players the devs were forced to come up with. Good stuff. Anyway, the Simpsons' handling of the L character is another pretty large swerve. They only have about 6 to 7 minutes to work with, so they obviously don't have time to do the big mental battle between Lisa and L. The setup is very similar, how L broadcasts directly to everyone, getting a glimpse of him at the microphone. We get a shout out to the rule about needing to know the victim's name. But Lisa figures out his identity almost immediately, that clever little reference to El Barto. It's funny how between the TV and the comic, it ends up hitting the exact same conflict in the climax, just in reverse. Now it's Lisa grappling with having to kill Bart. In this case, they don't have another magical book to solve everyone's problems, so they just have Lisa kill Steve. This is a pretty clever inversion of the source material, as in the very first episode of Death Note, Ryuk tells Light that someday he will write Light's name in his own Death Note, and that humans who use it can go to neither heaven nor hell. Lisa transforming into a Shinigami herself actually does kind of line up with that train of thought, even if the Simpsons version doesn't name drop that rule. In fact, there is a popular fan theory that Light Yagami did turn into this mysterious Shinigami we meet in the Death Note Relight movie. There's no official confirmation, but it's a popular fan theory and it's possible this ending references it. Even if not, It's a pretty natural ending for this homage. When I was originally watching Death Note, I secretly wondered if this was how it was going to end. Overall, we get a Treehouse of Horror segment that gives us a very faithful and detail-oriented homage that hits those key Death Note plot points and concepts, but at the same time pivots it enough for these characters that it feels true to The Simpsons. It's remarkable how just switching the main character from Bart to Lisa dramatically changes the thing. Really, it's more of a question now of which approach you prefer more. I gotta be upfront about my biases here, as I was introduced to Death Note via the anime instead of the manga. I would imagine a lot of Americans are probably like that. So naturally, the TV version, I'm gonna get more of the warm fuzzies from initially. I think one of the stronger aspects about the TV adaptation is simply in casting Lisa as Light Yagami. No offense to Bart, I think he brings the wacky hijinks part to the comics, but personality-wise, Lisa is the character you want if you're going to do this thing straight. Linking it with her environmental causes is a smart way to merge the two characters' motivations. You need a headstrong character who is willing to kill for a cause, and it's easier to get there with Lisa rather than Bart. On the other hand, I would say that Bart's version gets more into the messiness of having the Death Note. Not that Light was misplacing the thing or anything, but he definitely did a bunch of extremely underhanded stuff to keep people from finding out about him. And Bart's version hit some of those same plot beats, even if it were accidental on his part. The adaptation of Ryuk, I feel mixed about. I think I prefer casting Krusty in this role just because of how cool he looks. I'm guessing since Krusty was Pennywise recently, they didn't feel the need to shoehorn another cameo here. Not everybody has to be a Simpsons character after all. On the other hand, I really don't like how the comic changes this character into a ghost. It doesn't add a ton to the story, and it muddles the parody. This Steve Johnson is more generic overall, but at least they pay off all the name stuff with its ending. As for the character of Elle, I prefer how the Simpsons comics handled it. Partially because, once again, Lisa is more similar to Elle than Bart is. Wow, Lisa's somehow better casting for both Light Yagami and Elle. Isn't that interesting? They both do that classic pose, but Lisa's design fits that iconic wild-haired Elle look better than her brother. The twist that it was actually Ralph is a clever subversion as well. I'm not in love with the ending of the comic, the second magic book, but the Lisa and Ralph stuff is really well done. I think the key difference between the TV version and the comic is the overall scope. The TV episode is more laser-focused overall. It's going to establish the setting, the motivations, and the format in great detail. It's not interested in the complications or manipulations of Death Note. It hits the ideas of episodes 1 and 2 and throws together an ending. The comic is much more loosey-goosey with the rules, would rather use this book as a tool for chaos with Homer and Marge. The comic goes to more places, really gets at the horrible mess that the characters create with the Death Note. It's really a question of what are you looking for in your Death Note parody? Do you want the Death Note format, or do you want the Death Note mess? For me, I prefer the TV adaptation more. I think it is more laborious in general, spending so much of that runtime establishing its premise, but I think these parodies live and die by how true to the source material they feel. And I totally buy into this universe where Lisa works with a Shinigami to stop global warming. It gets at the heart of what makes Death Note so great. The scheming, the philosophizing, the ruthlessness. I find myself wishing they had more time to provide more complications for Lisa, that we got a Battle of Wits. But even still, it's a very appropriate conclusion for a Death Note send-up. It's a great Treehouse of Horror segment in general, would totally go on my post-classic list. As would the other segments on this year's entry. It was a good Halloween. I admit, I actually watched Death Note for the very first time only a few months ago on a recommendation. So talking about this from the perspective of a Simpsons fan who doesn't watch much anime has been a very interesting experience. One of the reasons I wanted to do this project was to dive into something completely new, get myself out of that Western animation bubble. The show doing this elaborate homage is basically them saying, "Hey you Simpsons fans, go watch this other cool thing." As a whole, I thought Death Note was very accessible for folks unfamiliar with anime. If you're a Simpsons fan who's curious about it, it's a great entry point. I was able to get into it really easily. It's also only 37 episodes, each 22 minutes long. It's a good one-off if you're just looking for something new that's not a huge commitment. I want to give a special shout out to Connor Gerard, who is the person who recommended Death Note and suggested I do a project for this channel. I am an anime dum-dum, so I appreciate an expert like him to keep me from bungling things too badly. The guy really knows his stuff. If you're looking for anime recommendations and you're on Twitter, he's a good person to ask. Also, he ended up getting to hear all of my random musings as I watched all the episodes for the first time. Here's how they basically went. Light sucks, L is so fascinating, WoW was episode 7 devastating, I hate how they write Misa, this corporation stuff is really fun, Misa is the greatest character in all of fiction, this Jesus imagery is not subtle, and I have no idea how good this final arc is. But mostly I sang the praises of King Matsuda. On this channel we stan Matsuda. Anyway, enough about my Death Note ramblings, we're here for The Simpsons. If everyone wants a full Death Note review, I can throw something together. I'm curious what everyone thought of these Simpsons parodies, both Simpsons fans unfamiliar with the source, as well as all the anime smart people out there. Do you prefer Bart or Lisa as the main character? Which version of Ryuk do you prefer? If you've never seen Death Note at all, what did you make of all this? Also, if there are any other Simpsons parodies you want to see a deep dive on, let me know. Let's use The Simpsons to get me to watch things. Now, if you'll excuse me, I suddenly have a craving for apples. That's weird. As always, thanks for watching.